Welcome back to Awakened Exchanges. I'm your host, Jay Rich, and you're listening to our first 420 special. As always, I'm truly grateful to be here speaking with you, and I hope you enjoy this brief one-week break from the Great Awakening map. I know my brain can use it. Hopefully you can clear out some of the conspiracy theories this week and hotbox your brain with the history of cannabis instead. You can always email me about other interesting topics or guests. You can use the contact form on our website or contact me on Twitter at Awaken Exchanges. This episode is actually airing right as I'm getting on the road for the official podcast scouting trip to Austin. If you can check out my Instagram feed, you should see me sharing an early morning toke at the Mary Hill, Washington Stonehenge. Hopefully right at sunrise. We'll see how that goes because we have to leave here around 4:30. I'm going to be making a few stops on the way as well as numerous more on the way back and sharing images along the whole route. I'll also be preparing some new show topics and interviewing some guests along the way. I'm extremely grateful to be able to take this opportunity right now, and I hope that it definitely leads to great things for the podcast, the vapes, and eventually the ARC community as a whole. Things are definitely heading in the right direction, and I'm going to continue to use these mindfulness techniques to look at my life from a perspective of gratitude and keep reminding myself of how lucky I am to be where I am today, as well as for the future that I get to be a part of. I truly am grateful that you're here to join me along the way and to share these experiences in some way, shape, or form. So thank you all. Before we explore the history of cannabis, here's a brief rundown of our sponsors. As always, I want to thank all of you personally for your support. Just listening and sharing this podcast with your friends gives me a reason to keep providing the best content possible. If you have the means and would like to contribute personally, please take a look at our Patreon page, where you'll get access to exclusive content and deals. There are already bonus videos available, and more are on the way. As for our other sponsors, Awakened Vapes is the first of the Awakened brands and has been helping you modulate your high with CBD-only, high-terpene vape products since 2019. Genesis Pharms has been making the highest quality medicinal RSO and many other fantastic products, starting with the medical community back before 2010. And last but not least, the Caramel Corn Company, bringing you caramel corn the way it was meant to be. And remember, if you enjoy this podcast, please follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, or follow us wherever else you're listening. And if you can, leaving a review or a comment on Apple Podcasts really does help spread the word. You can also support us on Patreon or connect with us on the social media of your choice. We are at Awakened Exchanges on Facebook and Instagram, and at Awaken Exchanges on Twitter. All right, now stay tuned, and thank you for listening to Awakened Exchanges. Genesis Pharms was founded on the belief in cannabis's ability to heal. Genesis Pharms is more than a brand. They're a compassionate community of like-minded folks that generate top-quality cannabis products, made with love and care. Community outreach is always on their mind, and their partnerships with Grow for Vets and Parents for Pot was just the beginning of what they hope to accomplish in the coming years. You can find their products on the best dispensary shelves across the state of Oregon. Their RSO is the most consistent quality in the state. Their tinctures are second to none, and their personal massage oil will have you and your partner coming back for more. Find them on Facebook and Instagram and ask for them in your local dispensary today. Don't forget to listen to Sean's interview right here on Awakened Exchanges. It's episode number 3. The Caramel Corn Company is bringing you caramel corn the way it was meant to be, made with premium ingredients in small, handcrafted batches and completely gluten-free. Their flavors include original, roasted cashew, salted almond, mixed nut, spicy sriracha, white morsel macadamia, peanut butter, butterscotch, and my personal favorites, chocolate drizzle and raspberry caramel apple. I can't say enough about how delicious this caramel corn is. It makes a great gift any time of the year. You can find them for sale in Portland area Market of Choice locations, and hopefully again online soon when they get stocked back up. Please visit www.caramelcorncompany.com for more information today. And remember, buying local supports small businesses and keeps your money building your community. Last but not least, Awakened Vapes has been bringing you some of the highest quality CBD vapes since ringing in the new year of 2019. I became passionate about cannabis after a car wreck left me with major migraines, and no prescribed pills helped alleviate the symptoms. Having only tried cannabis a handful of times in high school and college, it was a doctor's recommendation that led me to give it another try. Only then did I realize that we'd all been at least a little misled about the health benefits of this amazing plant. Despite an unexpected break because of the vape ban and then a global health crisis with COVID, the business is stronger than ever, and we invite you to check out our updated website today. We are still offering our 3 varieties with new and improved terpene formulations for enhanced flavor to go along with the custom blended effect profiles. Check back at www.awakenedvapes.com for any updates, and you can always email us about wholesaling or white labeling opportunities. We're back again, and unlike the last 10 weeks, I gotta say, and now it's time for something completely different. Bonus points for those. Thank you, Sean.
Yay!
Bonus points for those who actually know why I'm saying that. But either way, I want to thank Chris Mummy, who you can hear in the background over there, and Sean Shumway for joining me again as we explore history of cannabis for our 420 special. Are you both high enough for this?
I am sufficiently medicated.
All right. Well, we do have vapes available, so thank you. Let's start this 420 special. To begin with, I could have gone through and done a lot of primary research myself and put in all the article footnotes and all the other crap, which I did that in my 20s thinking that nobody else would ever do this. And then, nah. So anyway, this time around, so many people have actually done a good job exploring the history of cannabis, at least in a general way, that I found a really good article from CNBS, yes, cannabis, cnbs.org, called The History of Marijuana. The author is John White, and I'm going to kind of use that as the spine for this conversation. We're going to kind of read through there. Interrupt me at your will.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, the history of marijuana is a long one, and its use and reputation have evolved over time. It is believed that marijuana originated in the steppes of Central Asia and the regions that are now Mongolia and southern Siberia. The nutrient-rich dump sites of prehistoric hunters helped the cannabis plants flourish there up to 12,000 years ago. In fact, cannabis is one of humanity's oldest cultivated crops. Despite this, tracing the plant through marijuana history finds it becoming demonized and ultimately banned in many places. Before that point, however, marijuana was one of the most useful and celebrated plants on the planet. Did you guys realize it was 12,000 years ago? That's 10,000 BC. Basically, as soon as we have any kind of history, it's in with us. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it seems, of all these things that early societies were deciding we should cultivate this for our society, that was one of the choices.
Yeah. So, among some of the most interesting cannabis information is the history of the ancient plant. Thousands of years ago, the Chinese used both industrial hemp and psychoactive marijuana. A look into Chinese history provides not only a glimpse into the origin of marijuana, it also offers a look into the history of medical marijuana. No part of the cannabis plant was wasted. They used the root for medicinal purposes and made cloth, paper, and rope from the stems. The leaves and THC-rich flowers, meanwhile, were used as intoxicants and as medicines. Cannabis was used as a surgical anesthetic. They were also used by Emperor Shen Nung for rheumatism and gout. So, even back then, they didn't try and say there were no medical properties and put it on Schedule 1. I'm just saying, no, Schedule 1 didn't exist, but come on. So, as an anesthetic, I wouldn't have really thought about, but it would take massive amounts of marijuana to make me want to let somebody perform surgery on me.
And I wonder if that must be used in a specific way.
My guess is they probably ended up cooking with it in some aspect because it's just like today. As long as they can figure out the proper material to infuse it into.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was just like that in a medicine form to them.
But I'm wondering if, for anesthetic purposes, if it was maybe more like a topical or something. Because I know internally, at least for me, it almost has the opposite effect in that it intensifies sensations.
It would be kind of cool to speculate about what kind of uses they had for it. My guess is they had about what we would have today, just without the concentration or concentrates and extracts that we get.
Yeah.
But, I mean, as long as you essentially have water and enough agitation and cold enough temperatures, you can make hash.
And, hash, we've been...
And considering that region of China, I'm sure there was no shortage of ice.
Well, look how many, the plant world was and is the medicine cabinet for these people,
Yeah.
Knowing all different ways how to, like you said there, no matter what it was that they used, they were able to have uses for every piece of it and create, a range of effects and products.
Speaking of, hemp seeds were apparently set aside for food and to be processed for oil, so they were already utilizing that. Cannabis seeds were used as grains in ancient China, and the people often filled sacrificial vessels inside tombs with hemp to send loved ones off into the afterlife. Bury me with some weed, I'll take that.
Yeah, like a couple pounds of it.
Well, honestly, I
smell
think
a lot better.
Surround my body in it, and then as I'm on the lake, just shoot arrows of fire into me until it burns and everybody gets, a little bit of high. What do you think?
I don't know if that's how that's going to work.
You have to put a lot on the boat. All right. The ancient Egyptians also used cannabis. Historians learned this from deciphering historic scrolls from about 2000 BC. That's another 4,000 years ago. In Egypt, cannabis was also used as a medical treatment for sore eyes and cataracts. Still one of the first common things it was prescribed for in California was glaucoma. So, cannabis pollen, also known as keef, was found on Ramses II, perhaps one of the most famous mummies in ancient Egypt. So, yeah, it was already concentrated in keef form at the very least 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
About 2000 BC, cannabis arrived in Korea, brought by coastal farmers, and between 2000 and 1000 BC, it made its way into India. It was so revered there that it is mentioned in one of the ancient Sanskrit Vedic poems. What are you doing?
Your cat is attacking me.
I wonder why.
No, she's like freaking out on the curtain and then coming through the bottom and biting my foot. And
yeah, because your feet are there. She thinks you're playing. Okay. It was so revered there that it is mentioned in one of the ancient Sanskrit Vedic poems as being one of the 5 kingdoms of herbs, which release us from anxiety. Medicinal use of the plant in the Middle East is recorded in 700 BC in the Vanadad, an ancient Persian religious text, which is said to have been written by Zoroaster himself, an ancient Persian prophet and the namesake of the Zoroastrian religion, which his origins and Jesus also kind of really align there. It kind of shows to how many people they brought into the Christianity myth to merge over the years. The next chapter in the history of cannabis is compliments of the Scythians, a group of Eurasian nomads. They brought the plant from the Altai Mountains in Germany, and the Scythians not only used cannabis fibers to weave clothing, but they also bathed themselves in its fragrant smoke. They like to hotbox, apparently, instead of actually...
Quite fond of that myself.
I mean, yes, actually you are.
Almost made a very terrible purchase on the internet today and bought myself a little thing that's inflatable just so I could hotbox it.
You should tell them your idea about this inflatable fort that's what, like 4 feet by 7 feet?
It's not important.
Let's just say there's a lot of cannabis involved in the idea.
There's always a lot of cannabis involved in my ideas.
The Greek origins of marijuana take root as early as 200 BC. There it was used as a remedy for edema, earaches, and inflammation. Around the 5th century, cannabis began appearing in Britain. It was so valued there that it even made an appearance as an illustration in the Grand Juris of of Breton, and yeah, I'm sure I butchered that, but sue me. It was a book of hours that was created sometime between 1505 and 1508. In 1799, marijuana history takes a detour to France, where Napoleon introduced it after bringing it back from Egypt. His troops had discovered hashish there after being unable to find alcohol. So, like we said, that's 200 plus years ago. They were already bringing hashish back. I prefer hash over alcohol myself, although they both have their purpose.
I've always, especially just for recreational purposes, I've always preferred cannabis more. And in fact, I don't remember the last time I drank enough alcohol to affect. And basically because of the, for me, it's about the after effect and the way it processes in the body. Mm-hmm.
For me, the alcohol, it takes so much to feel an effect that by the time I do, I'm already overboard, and it just leads to vomiting or not the best of nights. So I tend to be a moderate drinker. I can feel maybe a little bit of an effect by the time I, wind down at the end of the night. But, I like a couple drinks. Some whiskey is nice.
Lots of whiskey is nice.
Yeah, lots of whiskey is nice too.
We got a good bottle today too.
Yes, we did. We've been on that Buffalo Trace, but what'd you pick up?
Caribbean something bottle of Macallan.
Yeah, it's delicious. That's all I can say about it. We're gonna have to look it up next time. I thought was it Glenlivet?
Or yeah, it might have been.
Anyway,
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah, what was the Glen in it? Caribbean Reserve.
That's good stuff. Or I don't know if I've had that reserve, but I've had.
You might have to have a little drink after this.
I would appreciate that.
It's super smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's
All
another
right.
4 minutes of editing for you.
No, I'm going to leave that fucking in. What are you talking about? We're drinking it, right? Maybe they'll pay me to support them someday. In Egypt, marijuana was valued for its sedative and pain-relieving qualities. The French troops immediately took to the hashish and brought a supply of it back home with them. Beyond an enjoyment of the psychoactive THC-rich marijuana, hemp was also an important cash crop in France. And that was the big thing, is before, cannabis was what we know of it today, which we only really know because it was made illegal. We wouldn't have ever thought of cannabis as this thing if they hadn't demonized it for 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a primitive form of medicine, but I mean, they also put mercury and stuff back then too, and thought it was a good idea, so...
But back, and I'm sure we'll get to this at some point, but in the 30s when Anslinger and Hearst went through and made this illegal, basically, between the two of them, the AMA didn't know that marijuana was the same thing as cannabis until 3 days before it was there. When they testified before Congress that it shouldn't be made illegal and that there are known uses for this stuff, they were ignored, and the Stamp Act was still enforced. And... I mean,
and not to mention, like, for me, the most fucked part of it all is and I know you were going to talk about this later, but with Hearst and not wanting the timber competition and outlawing hemp. I mean, if you want to have some sort of moral stance about any mind altering thing and say no to cannabis, that's your thing. But tell me one single bad thing about industrial hemp, and that fact that it was wrapped around shutting that down as well was just awful, because it's such a beautiful, wonderful product.
You want to know the bad thing?
What's that?
They can replace an acre of hemp within a year. It takes, 20 years to do all the lumber, and he'd invested in a lot of lumber, motherfucker.
Exactly.
We can't make this profitable.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sure we'll get to that with Hearst later on, but it was such an important crop that during the Revolutionary War, during World War II, we were forced to grow hemp because they needed the fiber. Mm-hmm. Even though it was illegal, farmers were forced to grow it in the U.S.
And it was, I remember having a kind of a moment when it occurred to me that there was a time when cannabis was perfectly legal, but alcohol wasn't.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a weird overlap right there.
Kind of cool if we could get back to that.
All right, so the next chapter in cannabis history unfolds in the U.S. Many years before it became the United States, the Spanish encouraged hemp farming on their South American colonies in the mid-1500s. Later, the English did the same thing at Jamestown in the early 1600s. There, hemp became a popular commercial crop together with tobacco. By the late 1700s, cannabis farming had taken root in Mexico, as well as the Spanish colonies and the province of California. Subsidies for the latter dried up after the Mexican Revolution of 1810. So since we end that last sentence at the Mexican Revolution of 1810, I actually want to pause here from the article and go to a separate article that I'm also including in the show notes with this one, on hemp and our founding fathers. There is just a lot that is just not talked about with that. So I want to spend a few minutes at worldhistory.us. And the subheading of the article is America's Founding Fathers Spread the Seed. And all right, well, here goes. It is well known that a few of our founding fathers were big proponents of growing hemp everywhere. A few in particular, such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, not only spoke great things of the plant, but actually took part in the creation of a hemp industry. Thomas Jefferson received the United States' first patent, a hemp threshing machine. He also smuggled new strains of cannabis seeds in from China to France and then into America, all the while serving as an ambassador to France. And Jefferson also wrote about the advantages of hemp over tobacco in use, labor, and for the sake of the land, probably written on hemp paper. Benjamin Franklin owned one of the first paper mills that processed hemp into parchment, that of which was used in many of the drafts that later became the documents that America stands by. The Declaration of Independence, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the Federalist, which are the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Articles of Confederation, and of course the United States Constitution were all written on hemp paper. George Washington not only grew hemp for clothes, which they were homespun, he actually has a quote from his diary on August 7th, 1765, and it's began to separate the male from female hemp at dew, rather too late. It is debatable, but today that technique is used solely for drug potency in marijuana. There are few trace evidences to the idea that our founding fathers smoked hemp for pleasure, but it seems likely. And as you look into it, those trace evidences they talk about do add up. I particularly think so. And like he said, there are no other reasons to separate male from female other than to encourage the flower production on the females. Anyway, Dr. Burke, who is the president of the American Historical Reference Society, has noted 7 of the earliest presidents as hemp smokers: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, Zachary Taylor, and Franklin Pierce. According to Dr. Burke, early letters from our founding fathers referred to the pleasures of hemp smoking. After all, Thomas Jefferson smuggled seeds from Asia, which is believed to be the origins of cannabis, and for thousands of years before Americans were growing hemp, Asians were smoking it. It's hard to say, but if Jefferson was aware of the hemp culture in Asia, one would think that he would have seen the delight in smoking it as well, and thus provoked him to bring the Asian strain of cannabis here to America. It's hard for some people to think of our first presidents and leaders as hemp smokers, especially with today's view on slow-witted people whom smoke marijuana. Yet some people look at the views of those days furiously scratching their heads in wonder to why such one necessities to build this nation are being neglected today. The hemp industry is a vast ocean, and the U.S. will not jump ship and swim freely. And while I will have probably edited out a few of these things in here, I do wish that this article from 2017 had a little bit more editing on it, but it'll at least serve the purpose we need for today. Thinking back, with so many people being against pot, and a lot of those people being on the right, no offense, although it has been changing significantly over the last decade. It's now probably, I would guess 70% of people are for marijuana legalization in some way at this point. But either way, that right-leaning, more conservative side of it always looks to the founding fathers as being the backbone of this nation and what we should look up to and how we should support it, and we shouldn't change anything from the Constitution of their time. It should be word for fucking word. And, well, they were smoking hemp. They were writing on it. They were smoking cannabis all day long. So what is the problem there, I guess, They don't want some certain things to change, but they want other things to change, I guess.
Corporations want things to change.
But, I think it speaks to the impact of when you can really, how the government can present an idea, and through the use of all the propaganda they did and whatnot, and they, created this idea, this viewpoint of this plant. And we've seen today just how long something can propagate, the way these generational ideas can ripple forward. But I think because, more and more, we're seeing that the story that was told at the time is not accurate.
So
it's like slowly fading away, but then, there's all kinds of people within viewpoints that might be opposed to it for some reason. But a lot of, this, misunderstanding fear, and those people that think, it's just this horrible, awful thing.
It went from being something that people used all the time without thinking about to all of a sudden, we were telling all of the kids that it was going to drive them crazy. The reefer madness thing, that's no joke. I mean,
let's make a point here to say real quick, of course, this needs to be used in a responsible way.
Yeah, and I'm not encouraging teen use or anything like that. I'm just saying they're lying.
But, at the time, the story was, it was presented as bad as like, heroin or meth or some of these more truly destructive substances, in which this isn't at all.
During the time, though, I think it was more so it's right or wrong, not necessarily it's intoxicating or not. Because, like, at the time, alcohol was banned, and within a decade or two of all of this happening, and it just was at the point to where it was beyond its usefulness, and they wanted to ban it.
I think that
it was demonized.
Yeah, we moralize a lot of things,
and that's what I was talking about. They put that level of fear into it, as we do with like these other kinds of actually truly horrible things.
Well, by 1850, marijuana had fully caught on in the U.S., and it even appeared in the United States Pharmacopoeia, which is the authority that sets standards for all prescriptions and over-the-counter medications. It proved marijuana as a treatment for a number of diseases, including neuralgia, tetanus, typhus, cholera, rabies, dysentery, alcoholism, opiate addiction, even back in 1850, opiate addiction, anthrax.
Was a thing.
Yeah. Leprosy, incontinence, gout, convulsive disorders, tonsillitis, insanity, excessive menstrual bleeding, and uterine bleeding, as well as others. Starting in 1910, however, an influx of immigrants came over the U.S. border hoping to escape from the Mexican Revolution. They brought marijuana with them, and suddenly cannabis was viewed with suspicion by many Americans. It was also viewed with suspicions by people like William Randolph Hearst and the DuPont family, heads of corporations, like you mentioned, for whom hemp posed serious competition due to its ability to be turned into paper and cloth.
And let's not forget, today there's a few people who might not like the idea of you being able to grow medicine in your backyard.
Yes, Big Pharma definitely has a bit to do with it as well. And now, this article does touch on it a little bit, but it doesn't go into much detail on Hearst. And so I actually pulled up another article that's also in the show notes for you guys. I think he's an important figure to this whole mess, and I wanted to go ahead and mention him here. So the article's on greendorphin.com, like endorphins, but green. And it's called Why William Randolph Hearst Provided the Platform to Create the Devastating Marijuana Prohibition. As the failed cannabis prohibition is slowly coming to an end, many people across America are wondering why it was prohibited in the first place. Young folks that don't know as much about the stigmatized past, all they can see is a plant that is nothing short of a medical miracle, and that's true. But I think that that's not the way most young people see it. Most of them still see it recreationally, at least to start with. And for some reason, it is against the law to possess and use it. Cannabis has been prohibited for 80 years this year, and this was published in 2017, by the way, so 84 years doing the update. Despite its unmatched safety profile and effectiveness as a medicine. Who would have done this 80 years ago, and what's the motivation behind it? Who is responsible for withholding the safest therapeutic substance from humanity? Well, it's well known that Harry Anslinger is largely responsible for this crime. However, Anslinger did not do it alone. The most notable co-offender is William Randolph Hearst, the all-powerful media mogul of the time. While Anslinger was a bureaucrat cementing prohibition into the American and later the world history through his influence in the United Nations, Hearst was a businessman whose media empire provided a platform to spread misinformation on cannabis. Cannabis presented a huge threat to a portfolio of budding businesses at the time, including the paper industry, due to hemp fiber's superiority and sustainability compared to timber fiber. Hearst spent his life building his media empire, while he was also heavily invested in the timber business at the time. Competition from hemp fiber was threatening Hearst's business interests for a good reason. Fiber from hemp is not only better for producing paper, but it also takes only about 6 months to grow, while the same amount of timber might take 3 or more years to produce.
So let's pause here real quick.
Yep.
So just to make this real simple, it's saying not only is it a cheaper, more efficient product, it's a superior quality product.
Yep. The next sentence is actually hemp is simply producing better fiber cheaper.
Yeah.
But you're also talking about cutting out an entire industry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the backbone of which had already made the few millionaires that existed in our country.
Which, I'm not saying that, we need to do this right and transition the industry right so the economy doesn't collapse.
Yeah.
But naturally, as a species, we have to
Like,
continue
why
advancing.
not choose the better idea?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it's not necessarily better or superior, but it needs to be a much more widely accepted
Or at
and
least,
recognized product on the marketplace versus hemp is the devil.
At least on the table, yeah.
Yeah.
I think kind of the same thing about, the alternative fuel discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is, people with the traditional way, so timber and oil, to a certain degree, there's people fighting for it just because they don't want to change, they put a lot of stock into this, it's what they know, and they're afraid to let that change, which, if we do it right, we can go from one industry to the next and everybody can still make just as much money.
So there's a documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car, I think, or Who Killed the Electric Vehicle. And there was a vehicle that was out there for a couple of years, and everybody loved it. Everybody that owned it was almost all celebrities. There were very few of them out there, but they never broke down. They never needed maintenance. It was cheaper, but the car company actually refused to renew anybody's leases. They wouldn't sell them the actual vehicle and eventually repossessed all of the cars because they wouldn't renew the leases. The car companies found out that it was so much cheaper and that they couldn't make any, money off of maintenance because nobody was bringing their cars into the shops for repairs, that it would, they thought, ruin their industry. And now as Tesla's gotten out here and all these other things, everybody has just hopped on the bandwagon instantaneously over the last decade, whereas for the 70 years before that, because electric cars actually existed before gasoline vehicles, mind you. We've been fighting against that technology and against actually improving the battery capacities. And
I actually
like
have a photo on my phone of one of the very first electric cars ever made.
Nice.
You got to see it in Reno at the National Automobile Museum.
I might have to check that out on that road trip here soon.
If you get a chance to, there's a lot of really cool cars there.
I actually will be stopping at Reno like the night before.
Do it.
So anyway, yeah, so Hearst had plenty of reasons to do all of this, and he was not alone in terms of his business interest being threatened by the prospects of hemp. Rockefeller was another powerful, wealthy business person of the times who had a different set of reasons to fear cannabis. Rockefeller was leading the development of the new pharmaceutical industry, and medical herbs, most especially something so effective and widely used as cannabis, meant massive competition for new pharmaceutical products. Hey, what do you know? Another millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
So Rockefeller did not like competition. Most of us would have heard of his famous quote, "Competition is a sin." And cannabis was not only one of the most commonly used, safest, and most effective medications at the time, but it was also easy to grow, as you mentioned, and therefore made it hard to generate a profit to pharmaceutical companies. Besides Rockefeller's pharma, another area that hemp threatened was the budding synthetic plastic industry that the DuPont chemical company had just begun to push. Hemp fiber was not something that DuPont wanted to see competing with synthetic petroleum products. So now we've seen paper industries, the pharmaceutical industries, the plastic industries. It's just pervasive. Everybody where there could have been profit made in those times, it's just all over. By the early 1930s, the Great Depression had hit America very hard, creating a severe economic downturn, the worst since the Industrial Revolution. Thriving businesses did not want extra competition from this plant, so they felt the urge to do something about it very quickly. And as this article says, even if it resulted in a serious crime against humanity. Apart from the business interests, another drive for Hearst to use his influential position controlling the media in the United States to spread lies about cannabis and his racist worldview. Hearst was known for his hatred towards Mexicans, largely due to his loss of 800,000 acres of timber plantation that he blamed on the Mexican general Pancho Villa. He was well aware of how the human psyche worked and knew that presenting Mexicans as the scapegoats in the midst of an economic downswing would help him not only spread his hatred against Mexicans and other communities of color, but would also help sell his newspapers and magazines. So again, there we have it. Money, greed, and fear of immigration. Same shit that we're dealing with today.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, as you mentioned before, where a good part of the, at least political limiting of cannabis comes from the right, like you say, it's kind of an interesting thing because ideally, I believe there is, good points and things to consider on both sides. And one that if you talk to your average conservative on the street, I think one point that they do at least profess to value is individual freedom and personal choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where does that line draw? Because, I think that's the thing is, if you're doing something with yourself and not having any negative influence, where's the issue? And so you have to look at these other reasons. Okay, why are they really against it? And it's, for all these control reasons and, these financial reasons and.
It all boils down to money almost all the time. Even when it's about the immigration, it's about him losing money and losing his timber industry. He blames it on the people who are different than him, and it's a vicious cycle.
It is, but it's a thing that I think everybody deals with on some level in their lives that sometimes is, or we see a lot is people cling to something in their life, whether it's positive or negative or not. It's just, it's what they know. And I think for greed, you almost have to look at it like they're addicts and their drug is acquisition.
Yeah.
And they're constantly feeding that.
Out of some fear.
Yeah.
At least my personal opinion is it's an insecurity. It's a feeling of something lacking that they're trying to solve with money. Mm-hmm.
It can be, it can go clear back to those primal fears of having resources for survival, having enough. I think a lot of people, especially the people that are born into that lifestyle, it's also about acceptance. That's the world. So that's what you do because that's what you know and that's what's accepted. I think that's probably a component of it as well.
I could see that. Well, Hearst's role in prohibition was substantial, as changing the public opinion on cannabis was no small task. Apparently, cannabis was such an effective medicine and provided crucial fiber supply and fueled the U.S. military might that people actually had a little bit of a problem with all of this. So they'd actually introduced a new name for cannabis, the misspelt Mexican made-up word of marijuana, and able to disassociate it from the cannabis plant. That allowed them to actually demonize and ultimately outlaw cannabis for their financial and political interests. I'm pretty sure that I said this earlier, but the AMA actually, they didn't know that the Marijuana Tax Act was referring to cannabis until days before.
Yeah, I'd mentioned that. Yeah, but I doubt tactics have changed much today.
I agree. How much stuff do they slide into those bills? Like, hell, at least we got UFO Disclosure Day coming on June 25th out of the COVID bill.
Yep.
All right. So cannabis prohibition has nothing to do with the plant's effect on the user. There was the Reefer Madness propaganda, but that was all based on deliberate and misleading lies. The government and the public were aware of the benefits of hemp even in the 1930s. The Indian Hemp Drugs Commission's report, as well as the Panama Canal Zone military investigation into marijuana by the U.S. military, studied the effects of cannabis on users, and both reports advised against restricting public access to the plant, which they did anyway. So, Hearst deliberately used his influential media portfolio to spread misinformation on cannabis. He had access to every segment of the population through his popular newspapers and magazines, and utilized these outlets aggressively to change public opinion. Nobody really knew what this crazy new dangerous drug marijuana was until after it was already federally prohibited by the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. This article is then pointing out that through those 80 years of marijuana prohibition, they might be held responsible for the deaths of millions of people and ruining lives of family and creating major health issues such as the current opioid crisis in the United States. It's all due to the financial interest and the racial hatred of a half dozen or so individuals, of whom one happened to control the most of the mass media at the time. It is a very interesting time to be alive right now as we're getting closer and closer to full legalization. We'll be talking about more of the individual states later on. But the map is sure looking a whole lot greener.
Yeah, we're definitely headed in the right direction.
So, the next chapter in history, according to the CNBS article that we're using for the spine here, was one of cannabis prohibition. Corporate interest and anti-immigration sentiment began to turn people in the U.S. against all forms of cannabis. I'm dumbing this down a little bit. We just gave you the more full explanation. But fearing social degeneration and addiction, states started passing laws of prohibiting all forms of it. Although the plant had previously been known as cannabis in the U.S., anti-cannabis activists began referring to it as its Mexican slang name, marijuana, in order to further tie its use to immigrants. Utah outlawed cannabis in 1915, and by 1931 it was illegal in 29 different states. In 1930, Harry Anslinger became the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and he worked to outlaw the cannabis at the federal level. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act effectively criminalized possession of the plant throughout the U.S. The act also put cannabis under the regulation of the DEA, and over time, a growing number of countries passed their own prohibition laws until cannabis was largely illegal around the world. Now, it's going to go on and talk about cannabis history in the UK, but I want to go ahead and mention here that one of my favorite facts about one of my favorite presidents involves JFK. And JFK was a well-known hero in World War II, pilot. He came back with severe back injuries. They were pumping him full of drugs the entire time that he was president. He was always on something. But one of the things that he did was smoke pot on a regular basis. He also got to fire Harry Anslinger. So I've always enjoyed that little fact, and I think that he did too. So I just wanted to get that in there. So cannabis history in the UK. Marijuana was also popular in the 19th century in Europe. It was widely used for medical purposes in the UK before eventually facing a backlash and prohibition. Even Queen Victoria was given cannabis by her doctor to relieve menstrual pain. Isn't that just like those easy excuses in California? Oh, yeah, I get headaches. Give me that, doc. Come on. Yeah. Anyway, queens, they can get away with anything, right?
Right.
Marijuana.
Which is, I think that's sort of an advantageous thing when once recreational became legal.
Yeah.
Because in the early days, I will say to a certain degree, it hurt the case of legitimate medical use is that there were certain people out there that were pushing it just because they wanted to get high.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I think there should be a clear distinction there.
The problem that I've had with all of it is that most of the time after it became recreational, they just completely started ignoring the medical side.
Well,
of
that's true. Yeah.
Now, you can get it recreationally, so it doesn't matter if you need it medicinally. And there is a difference.
Yeah. And
we already got to the moon, so what's the point in continuing the space program?
Doge is on the moon?
It's headed.
To the moon! So, marijuana was widely used as a medical treatment until the syringe was invented in the late 1800s. Because marijuana can't be dissolved and injected, it fell out of favor and was replaced by other faster-acting medications like opiates, in addition to newer drugs such as aspirin. In 1928, marijuana was officially outlawed in the UK. This came as a result of a 1928 International Drugs Conference held in Geneva. There, an Egyptian delegate put forth a convincing argument that cannabis rivaled opium in being a menace to society. While recreational use continued in the Soho jazz clubs in the 1950s London, as well as throughout the flower power era of the 60s, it did so under a veil of criminality. During the flower power years of the 60s, it also soared in popularity, despite remaining completely illegal, both here and in the United States. So, this takes us towards cannabis use today. This article doesn't go into nearly as much detail as I would like to. I'm going to go ahead and give its little final piece here. The history of marijuana is a long and mysterious one, but in recent years, the plant has started to emerge from the shadows once more. With legalization growing in a number of places, people are once more enjoying recreational and medical benefits of cannabis. Some nations, such as the Netherlands, have decriminalized marijuana possession in coffee shops. In 2001, Portugal became the first European country to officially abolish criminal penalties for personal possession of drugs, including marijuana. In 2018, Canada legalized marijuana for recreational use, and a growing number of U.S. states have legalized its use. Many strong laws remain in place, particularly for the cultivation, distribution, and selling of cannabis in all its forms. Punishments in some countries range from cautions to fines and even jail sentences, and in some cases, death still. And the final chapter in the book of marijuana history seems to be one of increasing legalization, with the final pages still waiting to be written. And I do agree with most of the author's statements there. That pretty much, like I said, brings us up to the current laws and regulations. I've included another link to those laws so you can look them up by your own state. If you look at it now, it's basically Idaho is still fully illegal. Wyoming is still fully illegal. Kansas, fully illegal.
Last time Wyoming was even in the news.
They
I haven't heard
care.
anything about Wyoming since like the 70s, and I wasn't even born until the 80s.
Yeah, well, they like it that way. It's just big open sky and cold. But that then leaves Tennessee for number 4, Alabama for number 5, and I guess number 6 is South Carolina. Those are the only states where it is still fully illegal. There is some form of decriminalization, medical or recreational status at all of the others in all of the other states. I just don't see why it is taking as long as it is in some of these places. Some of them only CBD is still legal, and that's an interesting thought to think about.
I mean, there's certain people that have been in office for 28 years, even though their state's in the bottom, like, 5 percentile of the entire country.
Well, and like Brett Weinstein says, we have this generation of people who don't want to leave office. They're in their 80s, whereas most people were out of the office by their 60s for a long time.
Don't you want to retire when you get that old?
Personally, I plan to be retired long before then and enjoying the company of people around me. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't be doing this still, because this would just be conversations with friends, and I'm good with that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. There's a different amount of work. Like, I'm planning on working on the farm indefinitely, working on the stuff around me, working on things I enjoy, but that then doesn't become work as much, you know? But before we wrap up, I actually want to hear from Chris over here. Uh-huh. So you've worked in the cannabis market for a while, including as a bud tender.
Yep.
So why don't you give us a little overview of the Oregon market? What popular products are there in the dispensaries, and where do you think the U.S. is headed as a whole, as Oregon seems to be kind of a test market over here?
I mean, as a whole, I would hope that at some point in the near future, we're going to get some type of regulation covering at least the banking aspects of it.
Oh, that would be nice.
In terms of like the Oregon market, I think obviously the most popular item that we sell on the market is either weed or cartridges. I think both of those things are hugely popular. Edibles are definitely making kind of a surge, but
What do you think is most popular with the novices, the people who are not into it as much? Because there are people who buy every week, and there are people who buy
I would say
every
the
month.
more like recreational, like the once a week type, usually come in and get a pre-roll or just a gram of flour, and
Really?
they hold on to it for a week or two and just kind of chill. That was actually quite a large amount of people that would come in. They'd only come in maybe once a week, pick up a gram, maybe a pre-roll, and that was their consumption.
And would you say that's the leaned a little bit towards the older 40 plus kind of people, or?
Honestly, it's people of every age. Like, I mean,
Very cool.
we had 21-year-old people that would come in maybe once a week, and that was just their full consumption. They just used it to kind of relax at the end of the week, and that was that. I'd say the average age of like the daily recreational consumer is somewhere in the late 20s to early 30s. There is definitely a younger generation dominance in the market. I know there is quite a few like older people, but I think for the large majority of older people, they tend to use it more for a desired effect as opposed to a recreational product. That is one thing I have noticed with the older generation. A lot of times when people come in, they are looking for something much more specified in a medicinal use aspect versus just coming in to have a recreational product.
You know, that's actually part of why I formulated Awakened Vapes the way I did, so that it was easy to recognize the effects that you would get as opposed to trying to decode all of the other crap that's on the labels and things like that.
Honestly, any more labels have so much information on them that unless you know what you're looking at, the only thing you're really paying attention to on there is terpenes, CBD, THC percentages.
And that's even if you're educated, looking at more than just THC percentage.
Yeah, and from that regard, it also depends on the company that you're getting your products from too, because some companies don't do terp testing on their products. Some companies don't do the full range of testing available to them through the labs.
They only list just THC or CBD, not the other minor cannabinoids.
And that's all that the state requires on their product is that it pass pest, mildew, and pesticide testing, as well as the other.
Well, and they actually took away
testing.
the mildew testing, the mold and mildew testing.
Great.
It might come back. Washington does it right now, but as far as Oregon, it's just pesticide. And Washington doesn't do pesticide, but they do mold and mildew. So,
Well, if there's one thing I've found in the couple years in this industry, if people can take shortcuts, they will.
Abso-fucking-lutely.
There is very little accountability for things if they're not deemed wrong by the regulatory commissions. So they'll try and get away with everything they can until someone says, no, you can't do that.
Which, you know, let's make that important point is we're given this new thing. Let's not do it the way the people that blocked it to begin with did their business. Let's not repeat that same thing and just make cannabis the new timber.
And that's why the federal government needs to come in and actually start regulating this stuff, because it needs
Sadly.
to have
Structure?
a much more structured type of regulation to where it's across the board, this product's not supposed to be used, or across the board, this is the type of standard that you have to have in order to put something on the market for human consumption.
It's a free-for-all right now.
I can go to Washington, Nevada, California, Colorado, and all of them have different testing requirements. All of them have different standards for their grows, what you can do, what you can't do.
I think Colorado still gets to send in their samples to be tested. They get to choose the sample for their representation.
And that's the thing, is you're not getting the consistency that as a medical consumer you would expect to get from a medical product.
Like I said,
don't get me wrong, there is companies out there that absolutely hold themselves to that standard, and if you know those are, then you know what they are. They're gold in this industry. But
they're the ones that keep their value.
But for every one that does what they're supposed to make sure they're putting out a top quality product, there's 5 others that are doing the exact opposite, and they're just trying to make a buck as fast and easy as they can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cheap and dirty.
And that's where that regulation is going to come in, is they have to hold those people to a standard, because if you're giving people a consumable product, just like in any other type of industry, there has to be a base standard to that. And right now even though in Oregon we've been legal for damn near a decade almost, it's still the Wild West.
Mm-hmm. So before we get through the different kinds of products, and I do actually want to ask Sean here on his preference of products, being more of the consumer of the household instead of in the industry kind of a opinion here. They're flowers, they're pre-rolls, they're also pre-roll packs now. Any flower products besides that? I know hash, keef, would those be considered still concentrates at that point?
So hash, keef are classified as extracts. Your typical BHO, rosin, distillates, those are concentrates.
Shatter, batter, diamonds,
concentrates,
sauce, all that.
An extract is something that is extracted not using any type of hydrocarbon solvent or any solvent for that matter. I'm not sure if rosin is classified as an extract or a concentrate. I'm assuming it's a concentrate just because it's a dabbable, but I'm not actually sure about that.
Well, and then there's cartridges, like you said. That's the easy vaping option for portability.
That's the easiest form of consumption if you're looking for smoking, and it's also the biggest benefit to it is the amount of discretion that you have with it. You can be very discreet. You can consume pretty much anywhere, and it's indiscernible from a Juul or anything else at any type of distance. So for people that live in houses, for people that are in areas or apartments where they're not allowed to smoke inside, but these are people that are obviously still going through the same things that everyone else is. They still get pain, they still have anxiety, they still have struggles that every normal other person does. So it gives them an opportunity to be able to consume in a much more discreet manner versus, I'm going to load a bowl and smoke it in my living room and then have the Karen next door call my manager and I get kicked out tomorrow and I lose my deposit and so on.
And you said that's for smoking. That's one of the other reasons people use edibles is because of discretion.
Yep.
But why would you choose smoking over edibles?
It enters your bloodstream significantly faster.
That's what I was going to say as well. You don't know how the edible is going to hit you for at least 45 minutes. Fast-acting edibles, supposedly 20 minutes.
And that's if you're experienced with edibles, too. If you have a lot of experience with them, then you know exactly how much you need to take to get whatever effect you're looking for. But if you're in the middle of a panic attack or an anxiety attack, then that's 45 minutes of hell.
Waiting for the onset to kick in and help.
And then even for me, it takes 3 hours for me to get full effect from edibles. I don't start really feeling anything until at least an hour to 2 hours in. So if I'm having an anxiety attack or I'm stressed about something, it's smoke up for me.
And what were you going to say, Sean?
Oh, it was actually the same point he made that, there's definitely a learning curve in using edibles, like you said, about knowing what your preferred dose is.
Well, and I think I've told this story before. I thought I was being nice because it takes hundreds of milligrams to hit me. So I tried to give someone a small dose of 25 milligrams.
Yeah.
And I sent them to the fucking moon.
Yeah, so that was one thing I learned as a bud tender, because I also have an incredibly high edible tolerance too. Not very many people have an edible tolerance. Like, I would say maybe 20%, 25% of the customers that we had could eat a full 50 milligram edible and still be somewhat functional.
Like,
and by functional, I mean they could like get up and make food for themselves or be like that. But there was a lot of people over the age of 40, if they had a full 50 milligrams, yeah, just go grab some Cheetos and just pray that you're functional.
So after, when I very first started using again in, see, what was that? 2017, I think it was, or whatnot. Mm-hmm. I got some edibles and, 10 milligrams, just 10. You know, this was like just starting again. And I was at that point, when you've had too much, you're just on the couch and just like.
I absolutely know that dead zone face. And
It's that moment where you're like, these edibles ain't shit. And try to walk to the kitchen and you realize you ain't got no legs.
Yeah, that's a good descriptor right there. For me, yeah, I don't even know what to recommend for people on their edible tolerance.
Start with 2.5, work to 5. If you're not feeling anything from there, then you can move up by dosages of 5.
And remember to wait the 45 minutes in between.
Honestly, if it's your first or second or third time experimenting with edibles, don't even re-up. Just wait until you have another opportunity to consume it and try and up your dosage from there.
Right, so
it is easy to take more. It is not easy to take less.
Exactly.
Right, and if I understand what you're saying there is kind of like wait a period of time so you're truly taking your next dose from your baseline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if you're taking a low dose edible, even if you're waiting 24 hours, you've got enough of a little break there for the low dose.
And I mean, honestly, if it's been 3 or 4 hours and you're not feeling anything, yeah, you can take more. But if it's only been 45 minutes and you're like, oh, this ain't shit, and you eat the other half of the cookie, you deserve what happens to you.
Yeah.
We told you not to do it.
At 3 to 4 hours in,
don't do it.
Just call the ride over and just be happy for the night. I mean, but yeah, that's actually why I started with vapes. I do have Awakened Vapes eventually is down the line. I'm going to have an edibles line. Haven't spent as much time working on that because I've been really focused on the vapes. But it's that instantaneous, within 10 minutes, you know how you feel from whatever you've inhaled. And you know how it's hit you and whether or not you need to increase your dosage or leave it alone.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I do want to recommend for people who have had too much, they get any of that anxiety, I just want to put out there, one of the big things I've been hearing in the medical community lately is peppercorns. Basically, just eat a little peppercorn. The terpene profile in the pepper actually counteracts the anxiety-inducing high. So,
and if there's one thing that I can just kind of add to all of that real quick, if you guys do not know what RSO or FICO is, please get some of this product in your life. It will change everything. If you're having trouble sleeping, if you're struggling with stress or anxiety, stomach problems, I know it sounds like the essential oil miracle package of all to end all, but it's honestly one of those things that the more I have tried to pass on to other people the benefits of it, the more it kind of has been accepted. And I think it's honestly one of the most undervalued items that is in dispensaries because, one, it tastes like doo-doo.
Yeah, it's not for taste. It's medical.
And that's it. I think there's no, like, bouginess to it. There's no glamour in the product, but it is one of those products that if you're after an actual medicinal feeling, or if you just want to make some really potent ass brownies at home, it's one of those things that it's so underrated.
It is, and that's
or
actually
you can even measure it out specifically as controlled as you want, and even if you want small dose, make yourself. Like gummies and Jello things are not that hard to make at home. You could
You know how to make 48 cookies?
Yeah. You can measure the amount and you can do the math. In fact, because almost all the math is done in the metric system, I know it's a little weird at first, but it's actually really easy once you get used to it.
So OLCC's actually made that really convenient. They now have to put how many milligrams of THC are in the product that you are purchasing. So if you purchase a gram of RSO and it has 720 milligrams and you put that whole thing in a batch of cookies, you now know how many cookies you have. You got 10 cookies, 72 milligrams a cookie.
There you go. Do some math. Well, as the consumer, what are your favorite products? What do you use regularly?
I would say either
Pot.
I do like edibles.
Okay. And you said you have a fair tolerance, but not like Chris and I, hundreds of milligrams.
No. Like, my preferred dose is somewhere in like the 15 to 20 milligram range.
And you ate a piece of those brownies that were down there?
He ate an eighth of them. We actually measured it out.
Were you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, we measured it. He only had 50 milligrams or so.
Oh, dude. I
okay,
thought
and what
he
I
ate
say-
like a chunk of that brownie. I was like, bro, those are not like new guy brownies. Those are like,
No.
I'm going to put you in the couch brownies.
Those actually, I feel those brownies. So.
Those brownies fuck me up.
I'm saying, I wanted to have a really good buzz that night. I knew what I was doing.
Okay.
I'm saying for
Exactly.
like my, what I would say,
Functional dose.
yeah,
And so your functional dose was how much again?
somewhere around like the 15 to 20 range.
And then for a recreational night where you're giving your brain off, we factored that in around 50 to 60 or so.
Somewhere in there, because you said they were
450-ish to
roughly
5.
450, and I had an eighth of that. So yeah.
So I think you knew exactly what you're doing. You knew your body's tolerance and how to take some time off in between if needed.
And that is also the benefit to edibles as well, is even if you are getting a tolerance to it and say like you start out at 10 milligrams and you build up a comfortability to it. So you do get a little bit more comfortable experimenting with it, but it is that thing that like when you overdo it, you can still overdo it.
So besides edibles, what else do you use regularly?
I would say probably the dab.
Yeah.
You use a lot of bath salt too, don't you?
Well, that's for I've only really started using infused salts more regularly recently.
Okay.
I've used them here and there,
How have they been feeling for you?
but I really, really like it, and that is a completely different experience.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not a high.
Yeah,
The dermal application of THC and CBD is very relaxing and sedative as opposed to like a sublingual or oral or inhalation.
Yeah, it creates. It's not obviously non-psychoactive. You don't feel any head change at all, but you feel. To me, it's sensation similar to like just getting after a massage. That
Jelly.
you can feel that shift in your nervous system. For if there's anybody out there that's used the natural extract kava for relaxation, it's a sensation very similar to how that feels in my body. It actually relaxes those stress held points in your body.
Well, and skin is our largest organ, so the fact that it's absorbing THC directly for itself after being, severely neglected. I mean, all of our meats that we used to eat, hemp grains. We used to get it in our diets. There's so much that we just don't get anymore. So it's good to get it in lots of different ways. Do you find dabs preferable to vape cartridges, or is it just a convenience versus when you're at the house thing?
No, I like it both for sensation in my lungs. I've tried vaping for, that was my first thing I probably used regularly, tried outside of flower.
Okay.
What I found with continued use of that, I think the moisture of the vapes started to affect my lungs a little bit. You were talking about before earlier, one main advantage is, the discretion of it. But thinking about it now more, would it not be also that vapes probably allow, especially for people that want to, use minor doses more for like medicinal reasons, much easier to control the size of your hit with a vape?
So for that aspect, like vapes are going to give you the same type of an effect that smoking a bowl would, but it's going to be a little bit more intense because with a vape, you're essentially microdosing a concentrated dab. With a dab, you could take anywhere from 0.02 all the way up to like a 0.5 gram dab, depending on what your consumption rate is. And
that would be the equivalent of half a cartridge in one single dose, by the way. A half-gram cartridge.
And they estimate that you're getting about 300 3 to 5 second puffs off of a 1 gram cartridge. So if you think about it, that's significantly less than the average size dab is going to be. I think the serving size they recommend for a dab is 0.05 grams. So you're getting 20 hits off of that versus 300. Yeah. So it is much more microdose, but you're also getting it much more effectively because it's being atomized and you're getting a controlled dose versus throwing it on a however many 100-degree nail and just pulling until you can't breathe anymore, essentially. Mm-hmm.
So that does sound like it would go towards your idea there, being able to capture that dosage a little bit more easily.
And I meant more especially compared to smoking flower in that, you know, your pen is controlled. You know, you have to hit the lighter just right if you want that control, you know, to really get the exact amount off of hitting a bowl or something.
Yeah. And I mean, a cartridge is also going to be significantly cleaner than that as well because you're
exactly.
Your fats, lipids, waxes,
much easier on the lungs.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I smoke the shit out of some flower, but
yes, we do. Well, any last thoughts on the recreational or medical markets? Anything you want to talk about?
It's 420, y'all. You better be smoking. All of you.
The day this airs, you check the Instagram feed. There's going to be, me and Chris at Stonehenge, not quite Stonehenge, but Maryhill Stonehenge, smoking a blunt for sunset. And
sunrise.
Oh, that's right. Sunrise.
We have to get up and drive at 4:30 in the morning for an hour and a half to go smoke a blunt.
Right before I start a road trip. So I hope you guys join us, and thank you both for joining me here today. I'm looking forward to seeing you back here after I get back from the road.
Hope you all have a safe holiday.
Yes. Happy 420, everybody.
Happy 420.
Be safe. Enjoy yourself.
Smoke up, bitches.
Thank you again for listening to our 420 special. I hope you enjoyed exploring more of the history behind this amazing and wrongfully maligned plant as much as I did, and that you're looking forward to finishing the last few sections of the Great Awakening map. It figures we'd be wrapping them up just as I'm getting the hang of writing these episodes a little bit and touching on all of the chaotic nature within that map and still giving a little bit more of a narrative side. So I hope that you're still enjoying them and that my learning experience has been more entertaining than painful for all of you. With that, I want to give a special thanks to all of our listeners. You are the reason I'm doing this. Please tell your friends about us, follow us on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, or wherever else you're listening. And if you can, please leave us a 5-star review or a comment on Apple Podcasts. It really will help with visibility. You can also support us on Patreon or connect with us on the social media of your choice. We are at Awakened Exchanges on Facebook and Instagram, and at Awaken Exchanges on Twitter. Thanks again, and have a blessed day.
Wow, that's potent.
I warned you, and she waits until you're in the room. She's like, hey, you want this?
As soon as you hit the record button, she dropped the hammer. Damn. You have to start all over. Your cat just fucked this whole podcast up.
Hey, I got through a full paragraph that I could edit into, so that's all good.
I think I can taste it.
Yeah. Welcome to my life. I come in here at 11 o'clock to get ready for bed. She's like, hey.
You know what the best part of the next month is I know that every day, John at some point throughout the day has to deal with that cat taking a fat shit in that Mustang and making it smell like absolute hell.
And she knows how to. She did it on the way down to Eugene. Oh, my God. Yeah, we're talking about you, stinky one. Thanks for the good laugh. That was your face was
Dude,
priceless.
it still smells so fucking foul over here.
It doesn't.
Like, I can almost taste it.
Yeah.
How does that smell come out of you?
Right? Where does
What
it
do you
come?
eat? Your cat has the intestinal fortitude of an elephant.
She must.